Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So, on a recent episode, I talked about the strongest decks in my collection, the ones that I might pull out if I really want to win a game, except for probably Joyride, because that one can turn into a game of solitaire very quickly, and many players don't necessarily enjoy that. But anyways, many of you seem to enjoy that episode, and some of you had some questions kind of on the other end of that spectrum. So, I've talked about my strongest decks, but what's my weakest deck? What deck do I still have in my collection that's really kind of stands apart from the rest and being weaker, but why do I still have it? Yeah, that's kind of a weird way that I phrased that, but I tried to kind of combine a lot of questions together with that one. Yeah, basically, though, there is one deck that definitely stands above the rest or stands below the rest when it comes to kind of power level, and I built that one for a very specific reason, but I've definitely kept it around. So yeah, let's just jump into that. Yeah, that seems like a great intro. I did a fantastic job. Did not ramble on at all. Anyways, so that deck is going to be Rarity. Now, Rarity is actually not a legal commander. Rarity is, I think it's just a promo, a card. I can't remember what exactly it came out in. If you see that mana or that symbol for the set symbol, that's not an actual Magic set. That is a heart rainbow thing. Anyways, Rarity is a 2/2 unicorn that costs 1 white blue and says rare and mythic spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Pay 1 and tap it, reveal a My Little Pony toy you own until end of turn. Another target creature you control gains protection from each color in that toy's coat's mane and outfit. So basically, Rarity is a My Little Pony card, and yeah, it's not legal because for obvious reasons. But basically, I've said this before and I'll say it again, Commander is a social game, so just talk to your playgroup. I talked to my playgroup kind of after I already had built the deck for a different reason. And actually, I'll just talk about that now. So there is an episode of Quest for the Jank Lord that I had a great time being on. Basically, we all played with banned commanders or ones that, aren't legal in the format. So I was playing Rarity. It was a lot of fun. And with that, the Quest of the Jank Lord guys have kind of rules when it comes to building their decks. They do build budget decks as well, but their rule is basically that every single card in the deck has to be 79 cents or less. So it doesn't really matter what the final budget of the deck is, as long as each and every single card in that deck is 79 cents or less, excluding the commander, obviously, because Rarity is a $30 card. So yeah, that's actually probably the most I've ever spent on one singular card. This card costs more than some of my decks, basically, but the rest of the deck is very much budget. And then actually, I set kind of a separate rule for myself with this deck, too, that I didn't really need to set, but I thought it'd be fun to kind of give myself another deck building challenger just to make this deck really different than some of my other ones that are maybe more synergistic and built to be more powerful. But basically that first part that Rarity says is rare and mythic spells you cast cost 1 to cast. I decided that the entire deck, every single card except for lands essentially, have to be rare or mythic spells. That way I can get that discount on casting them, even if it might not be the most efficient thing. So again, I'm excluding myself from any expensive or rares or mythics because they have to be 79 cents or less, and they all have to be rares and mythics. So I'm going to go through some of the cards in this deck that basically, might be some interesting includes or things that make me really enjoy the deck. Again, this deck is not powerful. I have not won any games with it, but I've had a blast, an absolute blast playing this deck for a multitude of reasons. It just does some really interesting and unique things that other decks really don't do. And again, the focus isn't necessarily winning. I mean, it can win, although it hasn't yet. But it's about having fun, and it's about kind of, going to the table and doing some really crazy things. So the first thing I want to bring up is mana rocks for this deck. It's really tough to find mana rocks that are, number one, below 79 cents that are really effective, and then also ones that are rare in mythics, and also below 79 cents that are effective. So you have some mana rocks that are not as efficient, but you're still going to run, like Tooth of Ramos, and I'm going to try to group these cards as best I can. Tooth of Ramos is an artifact that costs 3. It can tap to add a white, and then you can sacrifice it to add a white. So again, usually you don't want to sacrifice your mana rocks too often. There are some decks where these kind of mana rocks that can kind of, boost you quickly to get things out. Like my Nezahal deck, I believe I ran one of the Ramos artifacts to do that. But in this deck, it's just, it's an artifact that costs 3, it taps for 1. But it does cost less when Rarity is in play. So, Midnight Clock's another one. It can tap for a blue. You can also put an hour counter on it, and it keeps getting hour counters throughout the game. This one's actually pretty useful because once you get that 12th hour counter on it, you shuffle your hand and graveyard into your library, and then you draw 7 cards and exile Midnight Clock. So essentially this one is ramp as well as card draw or card advantage at some point. And then Pyramid of the Pantheon is another example of one that's not really as efficient. It can be extremely efficient later, but basically it's an artifact that costs 1. You pay 2 and tap to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, then you put a brick counter on it. Once you get 3 brick counters on it, it's basically a Gilded Lotus. So some people call this the Builded Lotus. Very clever. But yeah, essentially, you're running kind of subpar mana rocks in this deck just because, again, there aren't really, any really extremely efficient mana rocks that are both rare or mythic and cost less than 79 cents. But it's kind of an interesting, restriction for the deck because, again, you're not trying to make the most powerful deck, and it's actually not a bad thing that you're behind to start off against other decks, because if you're not targeted early, then you can kind of stick around and still do some pretty fun things once the board gets built up, such as clones. One thing that I thought, with this deck that I wanted to do is kind of run some clones because, I might not be able to keep, or might not be able to use some of those powerful creatures in this deck because I'm, working around certain restrictions. But if one of my opponents has a extremely powerful creature out there, I can just cast a clone and then basically get the exact same thing, which is great. So Clone, obviously, is kind of the original. It's a 0/0 shapeshifter that costs 3 and a blue, and says you may have Clone enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield. Now, obviously, there are better clones out there. There are only so many out there that are below 79 cents, though. Vizier of Many Faces is one of them. Essentially does the exact same thing, but you can also embalm it for 3 blue, so you can basically clone twice once it dies. So again, if you clone something great, sweet, and then it dies, oh no, you can reclone again, which is fantastic. And then Djinn of Infinite Deceits is another way that you can kind of utilize your opponent's creatures against them. You might have some weak creatures on the board, maybe some Mandorks or something. But basically, you can kind of switch those around. Djinn of Infinite Deceits has tap, exchange control of 2 target non-legendary creatures. You can't activate this ability during combat. So you can basically just say, hey, okay, I'm going to switch your best creature with this little one that you would not want. Or you can, even use this in a political way, too. Because it doesn't say target creature you control, so you can basically say, hey, I'll do you a favor, I'll give you that player's best creature for your worst creature, but you gotta do something for me, or you can never attack me with that creature, or whatnot. So it's just a fun kind of political card that you really don't see played a lot. But, in a deck like this that's not really looking to be the most synergistic deck, or that's not looking to be the most powerful deck, it's a card that I've kind of wanted to use in certain decks, and I think I've actually maybe used it in a budget build or two, but it's pretty fun in this kind of a build. My next kind of category of cards have to deal with combat. So something like Mass Diminish, it is a sorcerer for 1 and a blue. It says until your next turn, creatures target player controls have base power and toughness 1/1, and it's got flashback for 3 and a blue. So you can do this twice, which is fantastic. It doesn't take away any abilities or make them lose flying or whatnot. But basically, it does turn everyone, or that one player's creatures into tiny creatures that really can't do much. They're not going to be able to attack effectively. They're not going to be able to block effectively. And you can really kind of turn the game on one player's head. And again, if one player is way ahead, you can make a deal with your opponents and be like, hey, I'll mass diminish their creatures so we can kind of get some cracks in at them. And, you guys maybe lay off me for a turn or two because I did that. Fight or Flight's another really interesting card that you don't see played a lot. It's an enchantment for 3 and a white, and it says at the beginning of each opponent's combat phase, separate all creatures that player controls into 2 face-up piles. Only creatures in the pile of their choice may attack this turn. So basically, you're kind of choosing on each player's turn kind of which creatures are in which pile, and then they have to choose, which can actually attack. So they can't, you can separate some of their best creatures, and they can only choose to attack with certain ones. I actually got to use this in the Jank Lord episode. It was pretty fun to kind of separate those and kind of make their attacks kind of half as effective, which is a lot of fun. Another card that I think doesn't see a lot of play and probably should. I mean, maybe not. It's just a fun card. Angler Turtle. A 5/7 turtle with Hexproof, and says creatures opponents control attack each combat of Fable. So if you've got like a decent kind of blocking position, putting this out and forcing your opponents to attack is really sweet. And again, this guy's got Hexproof, so having it stay out there for a while and forcing all your opponents to start attacking, kind of making things happen, can be a lot of fun. Again, something that you're not going to see in a lot of decks, but it's fun in decks where it works. Next up, let's just talk about some kind of random-ish cards. I guess this is like a start of, some things that, you really probably won't see in many decks at all. I mean, maybe aside from Sphinx Travel for this first one. Master of Predicaments is a 4/4 Sphinx with flying that costs 3 blue. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, choose a card in your hand. That player guesses whether the card's converted mana cost is greater than 4. If the player guessed wrong, you may cast that card, the card without paying its mana cost. This is just a fun card that kind of puts a little spin on the game, when you're kind of trying to make it into a guessing game for your opponent. Basically, am I being selfish and or getting risky and trying to cast a really big spell and, making you guess wrong? Obviously, the safer approach for the opponent is to say that I'm going to try to cast a big spell because I'd get a lot of, mana advantage from that. But, or I could sneak in and try to sneak in some small ones, but maybe they think I don't have a big spell. So it just kind of makes it a really kind of interesting and unique play where, you can kind of cheat on the mana cost for some big spells. And this deck's got some pretty big spells in it. Rarity does reduce the cost of your spells, by 1. But still, this deck isn't trying to look to be the most synergistic or the quickest deck. So there are some kind of big, fun, splashy spells that you can run. And if you can cast, a 7 or 8 mana spell for free, that's pretty sweet. And if you get, a 2 or 3 mana spell for free, that's great as well. Next up, let's talk about Mirror Weave, which is another kind of really fun one that's kind of off the wall and can come in really handy in a good amount of situations, actually. It's an instant for 2 Azorius. It says each other creature becomes a copy of target non-legendary creature until end of turn. So this one kind of at a base level, maybe you've got a decent amount of tokens or kind of other creatures on the board, but they're not really powerful ones, and your opponent's got one really kind of massive non-legendary creature that's powerful. You just turn all your creatures into that and then swing out and, do a bunch of damage or whatnot. But this one can actually be really interesting in certain situations where, maybe someone's got a Blood Artist on the board and then someone else tries to Wrath. That player with the Blood Artist is going to get a good amount of value, by draining players, with, that effect. But now if you turn every single creature into a Blood Artist, some crazy shenanigans can happen where maybe you've got 7 creatures on the board, and now they're all a Blood Artist, and you're going to be draining your opponents for a ton. So some really weird things can happen with this one. It's just a lot of fun. It's a situational card, but there are plenty of situations where it can really come in handy. Curse of Echoes is another fun one. It's enchantments and Aura Curse that costs 4 and a blue. It says whenever enchanted player casts an instant or sorcery spell, each other player may copy that spell and may choose new targets for the copy he or she controls. This one's just a really kind of unique card that, if there's one player that's playing a giant Spellslinger deck, maybe like a Golos deck or like a Joda deck, you just put it on them and say, hey, you're getting a bunch of value out of those spells, and now everyone else does too. Or, if someone's playing a control build, you put it on them as well if you can get through their control spells. And basically say, hey, okay, you've got, you have a bunch of counter spells in your deck, but now every single time you cast a counter spell, everyone else can just counter your counter spell. So fun times can be happening from there. And the final ones I want to go through are kind of some more chaotic cards that you probably really don't see in, many decks at all, but I think are really interesting. And just, it was fun to kind of include these, and if they show up in a game, it just like can really turn a game on its head. The first is going to be Chaos Wand. It's an artifact that costs 3, and it has pay 4 and tap it. Target opponent exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile an instant or sorcery card. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost, then put the exiled cards that weren't cast this way on the bottom of that library in a random order. So basically, you're casting one spell for free from someone's deck. You don't know what in the world that spell's going to be, but it's pretty fun when you hit, certain things. So yeah, again, if you're playing against a Joda or a Golos player, you're going to be able to cast some pretty big things off the top of their library, most likely when you target them. Or, if you don't have a counterspell ready and, your opponent, you're playing against that, control build, and, they're trying to counter one of your things, you can try to get a counterspell off the top of their library and then cast that. So, again, it can just do some really interesting things, and some really weird things can happen with this one. And Access to Mortality is another really fun one that I really like. It's in my Selenia deck, I believe, but basically it's an enchantment that costs 4 white, and says at the beginning of your upkeep, you may have 2 target players exchange life totals. So this one doesn't really fit in a ton of decks. I guess you could just put it in a deck just for fun, but yeah. Essentially, there's only so many decks that have a kind of a synergy with this. It does potentially put a target on your back, but you can also use it in a very political way. Instead of just saying, okay, I'm not going to switch my life total with someone else, maybe I'll help out one of my opponents, and, help them, get their life total up a bit by taking out, down the player that's, in the lead and put their life total down. But I'm going to be doing that for a favor. Obviously that player is not going to be able to come after me for a little bit or whatnot, or they have to do some other kind of favor for me to make sure that's worth my while versus me just kind of getting that life. So this is something that can definitely kind of turn the game on its head. If one player is at 100 life and someone else is at 10, you can say, okay, let's switch that, and now you're in big trouble and you're set for a while. So definitely one that can be pretty fun. The final card that I really like and actually kind of came up in that Janklord episode was Aeon Engine. It's an artifact that costs 5. It enters the battlefield tapped, and you can tap it and exile it to reverse the game's turn order. Now, this is a very weird card. and it's one that's actually, when I first saw it, I was like, you gotta be kidding, this is an actual card. This is not silver bordered, this is a real card. But basically, this is kind of like an extra turn spell, but not quite. You're basically reversing the game's turn order, so you're letting the next player go, and then, you reverse the turn's order, it comes back to you. So you're kind of like getting an extra turn after one player's turn somewhat. But also this can kind of, again, just really hose one player especially. If there are 4 players and, the player across from you wants to get to their turn, then you can, reverse the turn order right before it gets to them, and then, they're waiting pretty much twice as long to get to their turn versus everyone else kind of getting a turn. Again, it's something that can really turn the game on its head. It's not a silver bordered card, but it kind of seems like it should be. And actually, let me note that in that episode of Quest for the Jank Lord, I did play with silver bordered cards. I did end up taking those out, actually, when I'm playing with a deck, normally after kind of that episode. And I just replaced them with kind of other fun cards as well that did kind of fit in that same restriction, 79 cents or less at the time that I put them in. And then also, mythic or rare as well. But then I also kind of want to mention, too, that this deck, if someone's not okay with me playing Rarity, that's completely fine with me. I understand some players don't want to play against silver border commanders or custom commanders or commanders that aren't considered legal. So I do kind of have a backup commander that comes with this deck, and that's Daxos of Meltus. Just another kind of, cheap, efficient, Azorius commander. I didn't want anything overpowered or whatnot. But basically, and it kind of does, it kind of goes along with the deck a little bit. Basically, it says when it deals combat damage to a player, exile the top card of that player's library. You gain life equal to that card's converted mana cost. Until end of turn, you may cast that card and may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast that spell. So kind of utilizing your opponent's spells against them. Maybe you don't have the most powerful things in your deck, but if your opponent has something powerful and you get off the top, you can use that to take them out. So, again, it's a very fun deck. Again, it's a deck that I never thought I ended up building, but one that I'm glad that I did. Again, a huge thanks to the Quest for the Jank Lord guys for, having me on that episode. And, if you haven't seen the episode yet, I highly recommend you checking it out. It was a fantastic game, a lot of fun, a lot of crazy things happened in that one. But yeah, let me know in the comments below what you think about this Rarity deck. Are there any decks that you have, built in a, subpar way, a non-optimal way, maybe it's not synergistic, maybe it's your worst deck, but you have a ton of fun with it. So yeah, let me know in the comments below, if you've got, your worst, but still fun deck. I guess that's a good way to say it. Yeah, as always though, thanks again and have a good one.